Okay, welcome back to the shop. My name's Mike. It's good to be back in the shop. And today we need to finish this fuselage up. And there are a few things that we are going to need to do. One, I've got a piece of 1/4 birch plywood. We'll use that for the firewall. I've cut it out to the exact dimensions of the firewall, and it will sit into, if you remember, the doubler sits back enough for this piece to go into and have just a little bit of the sides showing proud there. So that should work out well. Make sure that when you're measuring, you measure at the bottom, not at the top, because remember, these top pieces are flopping all over the place right now. They're not locked in until we get the fuselage firewall end and former number 1. So make sure that you measure exactly. Make sure there's no slop in there. That piece isn't going to flop around on you, and that it fits nice. And go ahead and cut that piece out. And we're just going to use 5-minute epoxy just to stick this firewall in place. And later we will come back and put these aluminum brackets in, and we'll of course use 30-minute epoxy. And that's where all of the glue surface is going to come from. So essentially we're just tacking it in with the 5-minute epoxy right now. That mechanical joint width right there is so small that 5-minute versus 30-minute isn't going to make any difference. So I have just mixed some 5-minute epoxy up, and it's starting to get a little warm on me here. So let's get this done right quick. There we go. So it fits in there nice and tight. We'll push it all the way down. We've got a couple of clamps ready to go. Now, one little tip about clamps. It's best to use something on the outside of these clamps to keep from bending that light ply too much. You don't want to flex the light ply. Because you can, what I'm talking about is if you put your clamp too far back, it will actually squeeze the sides in, and you won't have a good square joint right here. So make sure that you split the surface of the clamp right on the outside of whatever you happen to be gluing up there, and that'll keep from distorting your parts. Still pushed down nice and tight. That looks really, really nice. Let's take us a paper towel with a little bit of alcohol on it and just clean any glue squeeze out up while it's easy to clean. Got a little bit down here. Of course, this will sand off. It will sand very nicely once it firms up, but let's go ahead and get the majority of it off now. Save us some time. All right, that still looks good. We'll let that sit there while we go outside and make us a couple of these brackets. So hang on, and we'll get right to that. Okay, so we've got all of our aluminum angle pieces cut. This is just the height of the firewall, and I leave about 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch on the top and 1/8 inch on the bottom, sitting in that inside corner where the fuselage meets the firewall up there. This is 1/16 by 1/2. That means by 1.5. That means the two legs are 1.5 tall, and it's a 1/16 thick. Piece of aluminum angle. It's just 60/61. I like to buy mine at McMaster Car. I can put a link down below. I actually got this at the hardware store, one of the Ace Hardware, or this may have even come from Home Depot or one of the other big box stores. But anyway, what I have found is From the big box stores, you get the square inside corner. Now, I have found through trial and error that I like the rounded inside corner. That's this corner here. We really don't care about anything else, but that rounded inside corner is just a little bit stronger than this squared inside corner, and that would make sense because that would make us a little bit thicker up in this corner here. Well, I have used this 1/16 square on 35cc and 20cc applications for about 2.5 years now, and haven't seen any problems at all. I did put it on a Yak 54 with a 60cc single cylinder, and after about a year, a good hard season of flying, good hard 3D grant you, so and a little bit to its defense, I started getting a hairline crack down through here, and it eventually failed. So I don't know that it would ever do that on a 35. Surely you would think after 2 years, about 2.5, almost 3 seasons of hard flying the way I fly those planes with 35 on them, it would have failed already, and there are several of them out there in the field. But just a tip, if you can find the inside rounded corner, and certainly McMaster Car has those, and that's what I started buying. I'm just using all of this up before I start using the other stuff. So this is also 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch wide, just flat aluminum bar stock. It's 1/16, of course, steel 6061, and you can buy this anywhere. The big box stores have it. It's pretty cheap, and these are not expensive at all. I think I pay about $10 for a 4-foot length at McMaster Car, and you know, at 5 inches long, you're going to get an awful lot of them out of 4 feet. So the next step, which I think you've already seen, depending on which order the clip comes in, I have ground a 45 degree, close to it, doesn't really matter at all, angle on the end of one of these. Make sure that it's square or semi-square, doesn't have to be exact. And then right where it fits in the center, I ground another 45 inch or 45 degree bevel there, and that's just going to give us a little better weld area when we use the Alumiweld here in just a couple of minutes. It gives us a little better weld surface, a little more surface area there. So let me go ahead and clamp these down. I have been using in the past just a piece of wood, or actually small wooden blocks, that I would just sit these on and clamp them. But I bought a nifty neat ceramic. They're pretty cheap. I got it off Amazon. I don't remember how much it was, but it was pretty cheap. Little ceramic block. Haven't tried it yet, so today will be its first time getting used. And of course, I'll still have to put a wooden block here and one here, so that the clamps don't suck all the heat out of the aluminum. This steel will heat sink all of the, or a good bit of heat out of our aluminum there, and we won't be able to get it up to temperature. So I will go cut a couple of pieces of wooden block right quick so that we can clamp these things down, and of course the wood will not heat sink the heat away. Another thing that we need to do is clean all of these off with a stainless steel wire brush. That's important. I don't know why, I just know that it is important. I've tried it with a regular steel brush, and the Alumiweld will not stick. It just won't happen unless you use a stainless steel brush. Apparently the stainless steel cleans the aluminum better than a regular steel brush will. Now, and also you want to take care of your brush. I seem to get about 10 or 15 of these things built before I change the brush out, and I think it comes like 10 in a pack, or maybe 12 a pack for just a few bucks off Amazon. So really no expense there. Another tip is hold it off the end of your table. In other words, don't let it go over and touch the steel table, because then you'll just be embedding the steel back into the aluminum, and you have those same contamination issues again. And you can see that it definitely cleans it up good. It scuffs it up good, so it actually changes color a little bit. It's a little duller color. And then just keep that nice and clean while you're doing all the others. So let me get these done, and I'll go grab a couple blocks. We'll come back and use the Alumiweld. Okay, so I've got our parts clamped up, little wooden blocks under there. I may have to shift this one. It may be a little bit close, or we may just let it scorch. I'm sure that the torch is going to scorch it a little bit. But anyway, we'll see how it works. If we have to adjust, we will. These are the Alumiweld rods. I'll put a link below. I just haven't tried any of the other rods that are very similar to these out there. Of course, there are no flux rods, and the beauty of this is you can do it without a welder. I use MAP gas only because I have a lot of MAP gas laying around in another life doing some other projects. But propane works just as well. I understand, I haven't used it yet, but I will at some point. MAP gas is a little bit hotter. Both of them are easy to obtain in any of the big box stores. So let's give this a try. And I am going to, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in so it's a lot easier for you to see what's going on. Okay, I think that's a little better. And it takes just a few minutes to get it up to heat, get it up to temperature. Okay, we're back in the shop, and I've got our little firewall brackets installed, or not installed, but just sitting inside the fuselage here up against the firewall. And what I found is it's easier to go ahead and get your clamp strategy laid out before you start mixing epoxy and all of that business. And what we want to do is make sure that we're able to pull these pieces up nice and tight in all of the corners. I know that looks like a lot of clamps, but it's really not. And these clamps are pretty cheap at wherever you want to get them. You could use C clamps or whatever you want. I just happen to have a bunch of these from doing furniture work, so it's easy for me. You could probably do it with two large C clamps, put one here and one there, and then one here and one there. You could do one side at a time, doesn't really make any difference. I just happen to have all these clamps, so I clamp them up together. But the message is, get your clamp strategy set before we start putting glue on things. And I like to leave one side intact while I pull the other one down and then mix the epoxy so that I can remember how it went to put it back. And in this case, I went through the bottom here just to reach down towards the bottom and pull my little block. I just have a bunch of scrap oak blocks. It could be anything that I put in there to help distribute that clamp load there. So there's a clamp that comes in that hole in the bottom down there and helps clamp the bottom in. So I will mix some epoxy, and we'll epoxy this piece in, and then we'll work on that one there. So let me mix up some epoxy and I'll be right back. Alright, so we've got the epoxy mixed up, and one thing that I failed to mention is I like to take some sandpaper and just scuff the back of this up. In this case I used 60 grit. It only takes a couple of seconds. And that 60 grit puts a lot of nice deep scratches in the back of this. Now I've mixed the epoxy up and I've put some micro balloons. This is Top Flight's lightweight micro filler, which is just micro balloons. And the reason I use that is just to help lighten this epoxy up a little bit and make it stretch a little bit further. We're not going to have any bonding issues. We've got such surface area that's not really going to be an issue. I'm not worried about the epoxy breaking. This plywood's going to delaminate long before any of this epoxy would fail, so that's not going to be an issue for us. And any weight that we can take out of it by making it go further, I think the better. So just spread it on here nice and thick. Probably nice and even is a better way to describe that. All right, that's pretty well covered. And we will get some squeeze out, but we'll wipe that away. Put our piece in, put our little clamp blocks back in the way that they're set up on this side. There we go, that looks good. So it looks like we've got good squeeze out all the way around. Yep, it looks really nice. I don't know if you can see that glue squeeze out right in there. That's what we want, and it's on it's the same way on this side, and of course the little part that comes down the side of the fuselage there. So that's a good indication that we've got just the right amount of glue. So I'll get the other side set up just like this side, and we'll move forward. Okay, so I've taken the clamps off, and everything looks like it glued up very, very well on the aluminum brackets holding the firewall on. The next thing we want to do is attach some aluminum angle, and this is 1/16 again, 1-inch aluminum angle. And again, if you can find the rounded inside corner, I prefer that. This one's actually square, so I'm using all of this up, and then I'll go to the rounded inside corner. It is a lot better, a lot stronger, but for this purpose here, it's not gonna cause us a problem at all. So what we want to do is stick this piece of aluminum down in the bottom where our landing gear pad is going to sit. Of course, the landing gear will sit right in here, and it'll bolt through 2 pieces of aluminum there. So it just clamps down in that corner. Again, we'll epoxy it just like we did this. And I cut a little notch out on the front. You could do that with Zizwheel, or you can get a metal cutting blade for your bandsaw. It's only about $10 or $11 at Northern Tool and places like that. It's a real cheap blade, but I've been using it a couple of years, and it works just as good as it did a while back. The only thing I cut with it is aluminum, though. The only metal I cut is aluminum. So I cut a notch so that can fit around the firewall plate right there. I don't really think that that's necessary. It's not mandatory, of course, but it just gives me a little more glue area up here in the very front corner there. So I've never had one of those delaminate. I can't imagine that it would. I've never had a failure, and I have broken some nice fiberglass landing gear slamming this thing down, just horsing around. But I have never damaged that area once I started putting this 1-inch aluminum in there, and it's really light. So again, the goal is to make the plane super durable, super tough for us to beat up, and that seems to get it done. So I've already cut one of those out. We'll cut the other one right quick. Go. Oh, it's really good. Fits up nice and tight against the side and the bottom. So next question is, how do we clamp those rascals in nice and tight while we are epoxying them? The best way that I have found, and there may be a better way out there, if you know of it, let me know, is to use a wedge clamp system. If you've never used wedge clamp systems, all it is two pieces of wood that are shaped like a wedge, and as you slide them further together, the wedge gets wider, of course. So very narrow, and it gets wider, so it pushes out. And to give us a little more push room, I just put a spacer in between there, and it does the same thing. So and I can use these on a bunch of different size planes, and I just change the size of my wedge. So what you do is you just put the wedge in there, one wedge on one side, kind of bottomed out down there in the bottom, and then put your spacer in. Make sure all your parts are in the right place. Turn this wedge around. Doesn't matter which way it goes. And as you push that further in, it gets tighter, and you see where it pushed it up against the pushed everything up against the wall there and got it super tight. And then I'll just take a clamp and push down. I'll probably clamp it to the table right there, a big C-clamp or however. Probably put a C-clamp on it. You can stick weight on it or whatever you want to do. But once you wedge that in there nice and tight, it's pretty much there anyway. So I'm going to mix some epoxy up, and we'll stick those parts in there and wedge clamp them in place, and we'll be finished with this. Okay, so I like to use the micro balloons again for this purpose. Again, the wood is going to delaminate long, where the plywood, the light plywood, will delaminate long before this epoxy fails. So anywhere that we can lighten this epoxy up, the better. And as a matter of fact, I'm just using 5-minute epoxy here, just so I don't have to wait as long. I can move on to the next step. So I have scratched these up with sandpaper, and I've even taken an X-Acto knife and scratched some little grooves in them just to give that epoxy some room, or some surface area there to grip onto. And I just make sure that it goes in all of these grooves good when I'm. That looks pretty good. Looks like an awful lot of epoxy, but it's an awful lot of micro balloons, so it's pretty light. There's no way I would put this much straight epoxy on there. It would just weigh a ton. But we are, I don't know, probably 25% epoxy and 75% micro balloons. And I've never had one even give a hint to fail, and I've had them, you can see them hanging around here, some of the early versions of these that are cracked, and none of the aluminum has ever come loose. Let me get the clamps in and everything's sitting still. All right, just slide the clamps, and that's about it. And they're nice and tight. Tap that one a little more. Well, that looks good. Make sure we're pushed down good, and we are. You can see from the bottom that we're pushed down good. And now we can clean that off. All right, we'll just let that set for a little while, and at this point we're done with the fuselage. Our next step would be to get our wing cut out, get the holes drilled in the wing, so that we can decide exactly where we want to put this wing saddle tube. I know where it goes, but I think you need to see the process of figuring out exactly where it goes. I think it'll be helpful for you. It's not hard at all. We just want to position it up here, keeping a few things in mind: where the wing tube hole goes, where the bolt hole, the wing bolt hole goes, and where the anti-rotation pin will go. Again, we've got a little bit of leeway right there that we could move that back and forth. So In the next video, we'll start working on the wing and cutting some foam out. That's my favorite part of this whole process. I like doing this, but working with the foam is a lot of fun. So I will see you in the next episode where we start working on the foam core wings.